Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today I'll be covering SDLC, Software Development Lifecycle, and how you can transfer from your own idea, your own project, into a deployable, maintainable product. And also I'll be covering the 4 variations of SDLC models, which are Waterfall, V-Model, Agile Kanban, and Agile Scrum. What is SDLC? SDLC, as I said, is a software development lifecycle. It's a repeatable process for planning, building, testing, and coding a software product, but it also helps the team to manage the quality, time, and reduce the cost. And one thing to bear in mind that SDLC, although it's a framework for software, but there are pretty much similar framework for other things like hardware lifecycle, or there's one about data or machine learning, which is again very similar to SDLC. So next up is the SDLC flow. So there are 5 steps in total. The first one is requirement. So the requirement often comes from the customers that give us the requirements. What do they want in the project? What are some of the features that they want to include? Also, what is the problem? What are the problems that is being addressed in this project? For who? The purpose? And this step is really important because it defines the rest of the project. The next one is the design. Design is very broad. You can talk about system design, you can talk about individual feature design, but overall there's the architecture design, the user interface, the API, data design. So those are the very common ones. The third step is the implement. This is where the coding comes to play. There's nothing much to say about this phase. This is just simply executing the things that we have been preparing for the last 2 steps. The next one is the validation or testing. So this to test if there's any bug in the code, is there any defects, and is the code the most efficient as it is. And the final step is the deploy and maintain. Deploy for software can be an easy click, but for hardware you have to find ways to make your product cost efficient, mass produced, and also it is very important for software products to maintain, because oftentimes as a user use the product, they'll have bugs and they need to maintain the product. Let's talk about the steps that are involved in a software development lifecycle, and now I'll be talking about the model that is being used. So the first one I want to introduce you guys is the waterfall model. As the name speaks for itself, a waterfall model, just imagine how the waterfall goes. It goes top to bottom, right? So it is the exact same as the SDLC model, very linear. So you have the requirement, design, implement, test, and deploy. Those are the most crucial steps that are being done one by one. And when to use this model. So this model is best used when the requirements are fixed and the scope are pretty much not changing in the near future. And it also best for students like me, where you don't need to overcomplicate things. Just go from top to bottom and very clear, easy to explain. But this model has a really big disadvantage, is that if there's, let's say, a change in the requirement, it can be risky because one steps affect the other one. So if we change one requirement, it may change the rest of the project, which is not ideal in a workplace like a big project in a company. So again, this is best used for students, any self-learning individual. As I said, the waterfall model is just simply a linear model that goes from top to bottom. So I'll be introducing you guys to another model. This one is superior than the previous one because each of the stage comes with a matching testing phase. So for instance, we have the user requirements. It comes with a thing called acceptance test, or the UAT, the user acceptance test. So let's say you start a product from the very start, you have the user requirements. That is the customer requirements that asks you to do. You got the acceptance test. Then you got the system requirements and the system test. So a system test is an end-to-end test of the overall project. So test the whole thing as one. And next we have the architecture design, and you have the integration test. An integration test is the test between to see if each feature, each model works together perfectly or not. So for instance, you program each feature individually, and now you gotta connect them together, right? So when you connect together, they'll have issues, and this is where the integration test comes to play, right? And then the module design and coding. The module design comes with the phase called unit test or feature test, and then the coding. So you see, when you start these, you make an outline, just an outline for each of the tests. And when you're done with the module design and the unit testing feature test, now you start coding, right? So when you start coding, you got all the requirements and all of the outline of the test, and you go from bottom to top. So coding, you do unit testing, feature testing, check, and then you do integration test, check, system test, check, and acceptance test, check. If you have all of them checked, then you're good to go with your project, right? So this project is more efficient because it is simultaneously, so you do things at the same time. So next, I want to introduce you to the Agile methodology. So the Agile methodology consists of 4 key values. The first one is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. What this means is that this basically means that when you work in a company, right, you have your group and team members. So the Agile methodologies prioritize the communication between team members, and that is what helps them to collaborate and solve any problem that arises over the traditional processes and tools. The second one is working software over comprehensive documentations. So before, companies usually document even before they code, and that is what Agile not aiming for. Its ultimate goal is to places shipping software to your customers, and it is the highest priority, so you can gain feedback to help them improve for the next release. Excuse me. The third one is customer collaborations over contract negotiations. This essentially means that usually when customers order or work with a company, they will sign a fixed contract and from that moment they can't change anything else. But agile methodology allows customers to collaborate with the team members and improve on the future release, future cycle, and actually engaging in the working process, so that helps them to achieve their product. And the last one is responding to change over following a plan. This essentially means that agile methodology usually is very um, flexible. It has a dynamic roadmap that I'll be showing you later. But essentially, agile. Okay, so when you have a set of requirement for your software and you first make it, agile can always add to the requirement while you are working on the existing software, if that makes sense. Okay, so that's the 4 key values of agile. I'm gonna introduce you guys to Agile Kanban. This is a visual workflow for managing tasks continuously. So an Agile Kanban board consists of 4 elements: backlog, doing, review, and done. It is quite straightforward what it's doing. A backlog essentially means that every task that is being assigned. Doing is when you assign the task to a specific person and that person or group that is doing the task. Review is the task to review the task if it's actually done, if it meets all the criteria of what is done, the DOR and DOD. I'll be talking about that later. And then done is just means that a task, a backlog is done. So when to use this? So this is a continuous incoming request, and it is very easy to use, very easy to manage, and high visibility, of course. But the only drawbacks of this is that it doesn't follow the ordinary SDLC, software development lifecycle process, which is not ideal. That leads me to introduce you guys to another model, which is Agile Scrum. So Agile Scrum is a framework or a process of executing a task through different sprints. So for Agile Scrum, we have 3 different roles. Product owner. So this is the one that owns the product goal. Manage the backlog. Keep the priority and value. Quite similar to a project manager, a PM. And next we have the Scrum Master. This one facilitates Scrum and removes the impediments. And then you have the Scrum team, which is the team members, the build, test, design, and deliver the increment. So there are several Scrum terminology that I can go through that you need to know. The first one is epic. So epic is a feature. Just put it simple. It is a large feature. And this large feature is from the requirements of, usually from the customer. So this is called the epic. And then each epic split into smaller parts, which is called user story. So this is a small user focused requirement. So this is more focus. And then in each user story, there are subtasks. So this is the specific task that needs to be done technically by the team members and the builder's design task team. And task is a technical work to complete a story and no test needed. A task is different from a user story. So, for example, you have the subtask and user story. So when you are done with your subtask, there will always be a task team that tests whether if your task is done or not. But the task here is different. For example, if the customer wants something that you don't have a lot of insights on, so your task is to research to learn that skill. So that doesn't require any task. That is just you yourself doing a technical work to complete a story, if that makes sense. Um, and then we have the DOR, the definition of ready. So before every story, there's a checklist that you have to check all of them to make to ensure that the um the story can start. And then the DOD is the definition of done. So there's also a checklist when you're done with everything. So you need to check all of it in order to be done. A capacity is how much work a team can realistically do in a sprint. So they call it a sprint. A sprint is like a cycle. So I'm gonna show you later. So, but it basically means that how much work a team can do. Then bug is the technical work that needs to complete a story. So the hierarchy here is the epic, user story, and subtask. So when we talk about agile scrum activities, so this is the whole process that is being put together, the whole thing that we just do a very quick brief lesson. So we have the product owner, the team, and the scrum master. First we have the product backlog. This is where all the tasks is being listed as like requirements. And we have the sprint planning meeting. So this is where all of the backlog they prioritize into smaller sections so that it is being executed in the first sprint. So we have the first priority, second priority, third priority, and so on and so forth. And then we have the sprint backlog. This is the actual backlog that has been prioritized by the scrum master in the team. And then we have the sprint for this 1 to 4 weeks. So this is where the team members, the scrum team, the scrum master, and everything, they work together. Remember, right? One of the core values of agile is communications, interactions between team members. One thing that I like about Scrum is that they have this thing called daily stand-up. This essentially is a quick stand-up meeting at the start of the day to check in with everyone, asking what did I do yesterday, what am I doing today, and what are the issues that I had or I am having. So these issues are being addressed after the meeting. And after the sprint, you have the sprint review. This is to review the user story. To the DOD, right? The definition of done. So you have to check all of it. And then the other thing called the sprint retrospective. So the sprint review is being reviewed with the customer, meaning that the customer can collaborate, can put in their ideas, can improve on the product. But the sprint retrospective is the only team member meeting. And they ask 3 questions. What did the team do well? What can the team improve? And what has to stay the same? So this keeps the workflow moving forward as people know what they're doing, as well as they keep their workload and everything being organized and manageable. And finally, you have the finished product. And one thing to note is that during the sprint planning, the team should not plan more work than realistic capacity, which is how much the team can realistically do it in a sprint. So lastly, I'll be talking about which model should you choose depending on your needs and circumstance. Firstly, the waterfall model. I think it best used for individual projects because you have a fixed requirements for the project before you start, and also it is very easy for planning and also for documentation. V model is more like a company framework because it requires a lot of testing for each SDLC steps, a lot of verifications and validations, and also Kanban. The Agile Kanban is quite useful when it comes to like listing the priorities and sorting which work should be done first and second and last. And lastly, the Scrum is best used for products that has a changing requirement where they can easily adapt to new changes on the future sprint. And thank you everyone for listening. If you like this video, please leave a comment down below and stay tuned for more tutorial. Goodbye.